witches, and welcome back to A Coven of Two, where we discuss witchcraft and activism. You can call me Isha, my pronouns are she, they. And in today's video, we're gonna go through 13 Italian folk magic traditions as presented by Mary Grace Farron in her mythical book, Italian Folk Magic. No other book in the English language delivers such an authentic experience of what still happens in Italy, not what's been exported and done and adapted to, Italian-American stregheria, those kind of things. Completely valid. If you've seen my first video, you'll see, completely valid. This is just basically the experience of someone that, much like Mary Grace, she grew up in Montreal, within an Italian community. I grew up in a village in northwest Italy, which counts about 600 people, and our experience was pretty much the same. So I'm bringing these 13 examples so that you can have another story time about it, basically. We're going to talk about the Catholic influences from statues to saints. We're going to talk about witchcraft and folk magic and its overlap with medicine that we have in Italy. We're going to talk about crossovers between what is commonly an habit, and you can read about it in general witchcraft, but was also done in Italy, possibly originated in Italy, and I'll explain why. Well, Mary Grace will explain why. We're going to talk about dreams and the numbers of the lottery that you can get from them. We're going to talk about Italian playing cards and how you can do divinations with them. We're going to talk, of course, about Malocchio, the evil eye. How can you divine to see if you have it or if anybody else has it, and how you can ward yourself off from it. We're going to talk about the crossover that Italian folk magic very openly has with old pagan traditions, and so pagan deities as well. We're gonna go into a couple of rituals and magic spells, and indeed we're gonna talk about ancestors. So buckle up, because we're going back to Italy. But before we get started, let me remind you 3 things. 1, I've opened a coffee. You can get a tarot reading for the year ahead there with me, Italian style, and you can only do that for the next few days though, because it's gonna stop at the end of January, because year ahead. So that's one thing. Second thing, we're gonna do another tarot workshop here in Cardiff on the 11th of February. It's a Sunday this time. You find all the details down in the description below. And if you go to the community tab, not only you have a poll for next week's video, but you also have a poll for the forthcoming 1,000 subscribers video, which is going to be a Q&A. You can leave a question in the comments of that post or completely anonymously. So anything goes, anything you want to ask, you're completely protected and covered. I will not know who you are, your email address, you can ask me anything. So you can go to the community tab, check out those things, check out coffee, and now we can get to Italy. I've been thinking about this because I've had Grace's book, of course, for a couple of months now, so I've had a chance to go through it. I've had a chance to talk to Grace via Instagram. It was so beautifully serendipitous. She left a comment on one of my videos, and then I realized, I know this name. Why do I know this name? And I realized, it's actually Mary Grace Farron, the writer of Italian Folk Magic Rue's Kitchen. So I went a bit fangirl, I still am. And we've been chatting on and off on Instagram, which it's the best connection that I could still have to Italy from a good and nice person from Italy, because as you might have gathered from my previous videos, I have a bit of a conflicting relationship with my Italian heritage. So it was amazing to be able to connect with someone that comes from a similar heritage, but has my same kind of desires and open-mindedness to basically bring Italian folk magic in the 21st century and break down the barriers and the boundaries that it has. So I cannot thank Mary Grace enough for her kindness towards me. So thank you, Mary Grace. And as you mentioned in your book, sa benedica, just in case. Because you can't do a compliment to someone without ending it with a blessing, because otherwise it could be Malocchio kind of things. So always. That is an extra one that you get of the 13 things. The 13 things that I have highlighted from Mary Grace's book. It's on my iPad because I highlighted colored, and on the Kindle I wouldn't see the colors. Salt. We're gonna start with salt. Mary Grace tells us that to clear or purify, simply toss a pinch of salt in every corner. Now sweep from the corners inward. Collect the salt and toss it out the back door. In a 2-quart pot, add 3 cinnamon sticks, 3 whole cloves, a teaspoon of sea salt and a lemon cut in half. Fill the pot 3/4 of the way with water. Bring to a boil and then lower the heat and allow to simmer for 1 to 2 hours. The mixture smells amazing and clears not only your kitchen but your entire home. Turn off the heat and leave to cool. Once it's cooled, remove the lemon and pour the rest in a clean spray bottle. I keep this purifying blessing solution on hand for whenever I need to clear the hair. It's interesting because in the last month or so, I've actually come to do the cotto, which is basically you boil herbs. In my case, I started to do it with rosemary because I've heard amazing things about rosemary water, basically for the hair, for curly hair. And whilst I started to do it, I realized, oh, this is many birds with one stone, because not only I then get the water and I let it cool down and it helps with my curls, but also when it boils and it spreads around scent and essence of rosemary. Rosemary is a very protective herb. It's actually what I usually burn to clear the house, which is literally just the sprigs of rosemary that you get in a supermarket. I bundle them together and dry them in the house. Sometimes I just bundle them together, put it on a heater so that it dries faster. That way also the essence of rosemary gets into the house. And then once it's dry, I just burn it around. Because again, smudging and using white sage, kind of cultural appropriation, which we will need to talk about in a specific video. Rosemary and just smoking, fumigating, it's not that. It's something that was common even in Europe, like you would fumigate against like bacteria, we didn't know that it was bacteria, but against the plague and those kind of things. So rosemary, also very Italian, so probably there's that. Most of the rosemary that I find here in the UK is actually grown in Italy, so every time that I get it, it's like, oh, it's a piece of my heritage that comes here. So I can totally see where that comes from. And the salt, of course, not only we use it to spread around and clean, but also once you've cleansed, I personally still leave bits and bobs of salt around the house. If you've seen recently, I found a beautiful key. Rusted, big, I had this insane attraction to it, so I brought it home. And I know that when you find antique bits, you need to sort of be careful, especially if you have this draw to them, because I remember Annabelle's video where she talks about her table, chest of drawer. She was so in love with it, she was so attracted to it, and turns out it was haunted, and it took some work, and Olivia, the Witch of Wonderlust, actually went to help her. So after that, I'm mindful of what I bring back home, just in case. So because I had this attraction to this key and I brought it home, I tried to figure out what do we do though. I don't want to bring it home if it's haunted, but I really want it. So what I figured out while I was walking back home was, just in case, I'm gonna ask my wife to prepare a plate with a ring of salt. I then knocked the door at my house, asked my wife to come outside so that I could place the key within the ring of salt when it was still outside the house. We brought it in, we did divination on it. Turns out that it was charged, but not possessed. Just in case, like Mary Grace suggests, I buried in salt for 3 days. But I think it was charged with good energy, because the moment that I got it, a lucky thing, very, 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 very lucky thing happened. So I really like my key, the key. So I completely see the point of both salt and the boiling of herbs that you have around, and you keep the water. And it's bizarre because the second thing, the water, it was not something that we used to do in Italy. It's just something that came to me. So I think there is just something around in the air when it's part of your history and generational history, maybe. The second point is about altars and statues in the house and in courtyards. In my Italian neighborhoods in Quebec and Connecticut, Madonna statues graced impeccably tended front lawns surrounded by low black wrought iron fences. The most common statues found in home were the Miraculous Madonna, the Immaculate Heart Madonna, the Sacred Heart of Jesus, and Our Lady of Lourdes. I do not remember a time in my childhood where we didn't have a little statue/bottle of the Madonna of Lourdes with water from Lourdes in it, despite the fact that nobody in my family ever went to Lourdes. So I don't know, did we just buy them? Was it just something that the churches had? Or if they did pilgrimages, they brought them back? I don't know. We never used the water inside. Like, there wasn't an important enough reason, I guess, to disturb the Madonna for that. But we had a lot of these little bottles around, everywhere. I do wonder now if, you know, sometimes spells that are at the intersection of the sacred and profane, which literally is Italian folk magic because of how embedded in Catholicism is, sometimes rituals, let's call them rituals, not spells, require holy water. And I guess the Lourdes bottles and the water inside, because it comes from the blessed spring of Lourdes, is blessed and holy. So I do wonder if that is something one can get to then use in spells. The third thing is a point of intersection between Italian folk magic and medicine. And Grace has a good reason to talk about it because she knows what she's talking about. In her day life, she's actually a healthcare professional. In my family and community, witchcraft and medicine are two sides of the same coin. In matters of wellness and illness, there are 2 points of view. There are members of my family and community who, upon experiencing ill health, will assume it is witchcraft until witchcraft is ruled out by a trusted spiritual healer. If witchcraft is ruled out, or in some cases dealt with and symptoms persist, only then they will seek medical attention. Tonsillitis or swollen glands, as for sore throats, first gargle with salt water to disinfect, followed by gargling with barley water, water that has been used to cook barley, to soothe. Then rub the neck in a wool cowl or scarf. Finally, recite a following prayer or incantation to San Biagio. As I mentioned in my first video about this, there is a unique overlap between physical ailments and maladies and the belief that they have a magical explanation. The Malocchio specifically is something that, because it's thought to be cast involuntarily, just out of someone being jealous, and the way that it affects manifesting sometimes dizziness, headaches especially, anxiety, it's really peculiar. And all those symptoms are clearly symptoms of unwellness, but might not be explained by, I don't know, having a fever or something like that, despite the fact that sometimes apparently the Malocchio also brings a fever and those kind of things. And along with divining for it and understand, is there the Malocchio and do we get rid of it, which is literally an example that Mary Grace brings in her introduction. There is a story literally about that. But as I mentioned, even with like having worms as children, that is considered also an overlap because not only children could have pinworms, so actually parasites, but worms was a way to say possessed in a way by evil. And that's why children would have to eat garlic. You would go and get segnature done, which is basically not only signs of X's and crosses over your head, over the part of your body that hurts or brings the ailment. In my case was the stomach for worms, vermi, but also there were these threads that were cutting water. There's a lot of work going on for the understanding of how do we fight this, if this is supernatural, but also has a physical manifestation in the illness. I highlighted the point about tonsillitis because that is definitely something that I suffered from a lot as a child. It was the most common thing that would happen to me. And I can't quite remember the barley water, but I definitely remember the gargles with salt, and it would be something that I would run away from when I realized it was getting ready, because it was also warm water. I can't, even when you end up in the sea and you end up drinking seawater, that's really, really salty and unpleasant. Think of that as warm as a teacup. Yeah, I'm sure it's effective, because it was. But boy, oh boy, if it's not nice for a child to go through that. I have a cheating point for point number 4 under personal well-being, because I highlighted 3 points and I have a story for each of them. The first one is about the number 13. The number 13 in Italy is lucky. The only exception is to never set a table for 13 people, as done at the Last Supper. The number 17 is unlucky. And I do know that because I was born on a 17th. And actually, my wife asked me before I did this video as to, are you doing the 13 things because 13 is unlucky, so it's a witch number? And I explained to her, no, actually, for us it's fine. I think the feast of certain saints are on the 13th, so that's completely fine. 17 is an issue because in Roman numerals, it's written XVI, which if you scramble, if you do an anagram basically, can read as vixi. Vixi in Latin is the past tense of to live. So vixi meant I have lived, I lived, therefore now you're dead. And that's why 17 is considered unlucky. However, possibly because I was born on the 17th, I always loved the number 17. In Italy, you don't have Friday the 13th. In fact, the film is actually translated as Friday the 17th. So here's a little bit numerology for you. When your left hand is itchy, you will receive money. If your right hand is itchy, you will pay money. Alternatively, if your right hand is itchy, you will give a beating. If your left hand is itchy, you will receive a beating. Funnily enough, think about it for a second. This is something that we also believe in a certain way in the wider witchcraft community. It's the point about projective hand and receiving hand. So your dominant hand, which for most people is the right one, is the one that you give things with. And that's why you're gonna give money if your right hand is itchy. And vice versa, if your left hand is itchy, which is the receiving end most of the time, then you're gonna receive something, so money or a beating. But that applies to depending on your dominant hand. So for most people it's like that. Do adapt if you're left-handed, because then your left hand is your dominant hand. But I thought that it was really interesting that it was basically said in another way, but it's definitely something that in the wider witchcraft community we always consider about projecting and receiving hands. A woman should never do the following when menstruating: touch flower buds, they will not bloom; knead bread dough, it will not have flavor; touch preserved foods, they will spoil. I've added this because on the surface it might sound as a very misogynistic thing. And by all means, in more than one cultures, there were true issues historically about how women would get shunned when they were having their period. In India, they used to have huts where women needed to live for those 3 to 5 to 7 days per month. Sometimes they weren't heated and people would have health issues because of that. So that's absolutely horrible. The way that it applies in these examples, in my head, is a very clever way that women themselves came up with to use this thing to their advantage. If you notice, the things that it mentions are all things that would be part of a woman's job, especially in the olden days. So tend to the garden, or therefore go work in the fields, cooking, making the bread, touch food, so cooking, which to me, in my head, correct me if I'm wrong, tell me what you think about it, but in my head, it was a way of women to reclaim the way that they were shunned and looked down upon when they were menstruating. And you know what? Let's make it useful for ourselves so that at least in those days, we don't have to work. And because society and the patriarchy is not just going to let us off having days off, even if thankfully we're trying these days to actually get to a point where people can have days off if they are menstruating and they are unwell because of it, which a lot of people go through. Of course, when you were a farmer, you were working in the fields, nobody was that understanding. However, if they thought superstitiously that whatever you did was going to bring a wrong delivery, a wrong yielding, they would forbid you from doing it. So to me, that is a very clever way that the subculture of women silently to the patriarchy, but between each other, sort of agreed upon, you know what, let's actually start the rumor that we ruin things so that in those days they leave us the fuck alone. And I like that idea. The fifth point is about dreams and lottery numbers, namely the Smorfia from Naples. Neapolitans have a dream dictionary called La Smorfia, consisting of a list of words, each with a corresponding number for the sole purpose of playing the lottery. The word Smorfia means grimace in Italian, but it's most likely a Neapolitan reference to Morpheus, the god of dreams. It is quite elaborate. Following is a sample of 90 things a person may dream about their corresponding numbers, which is one of the reasons why you really should get Grace's book, because a book that has all these traditions and a complete Neapolitan Smorfia and spells and all, I do recommend going through that. That's why I'm not going in detail for that. Here's the thing about dreams and numbers. I have a weird attitude. At least I used to when I was a child. And it's less often now, but still. Rarely I would have a dream that for whatever reason I knew was valuable. And in those rare occasions I would tell to my mother or my grandmother about it. And I think it started either just before or just after my grandfather passed away, so I was really, really young. And whenever this would happen, either I would dream directly numbers, and so those numbers would be played, or I would dream things that my mother or the people at the edicola, the lotto place, would translate in numbers through the Smorfia, and I am unbeaten. In the sense that it hasn't happened often, but every time that it has happened, I have made my family win something. I think the most outrageous winning was just after my grandfather passed away, because I dreamt him and I dreamt of eggs and of the number 4. So they extracted numbers from these, and in the end there were 3 numbers, so it was a terno. 3 numbers at the lotto in Italy in the 90s. If it was on every ruota, it's a bit different lotto in Italy. You don't just have the extraction every week of 5 numbers or 7 or whatever. You have a lot of numbers extracted because you have them extracted on the different ruote. And ruote would be regional. You can play, I think it's 20 ruote, wheels, and they are related to cities and provinces. So you can play on every ruota, and of course you get a smaller prize. But if you play a certain combination of numbers in a specific ruota, and that comes up, it's good money. So the bizarre thing is that I had this dream. It was 3 numbers in total, one of that I literally saw and the other 2 extracted from the Smorfia. And it was played on all the ruota, all the wheels, and it yielded like 200,000-300,000 lira at the time, which is the equivalent of like 150 euros nowadays. I don't know with inflation. The bizarre thing was that after the extraction, there was a different person at the lotto place than the one that translated my dream. And they realized from being told the story again that, oh, but you had the ruota as well. The dream told you the ruota as well because you had uova, eggs. And if you counted the letter of uova was 4, the 4th ruota is Genoa, which was actually one of the closest cities to where I was. And if it had been on that wheel specifically as well, it would have yielded something like 7 or 8 million lira, which was an incredible lot in the 90s. So it's that kind of thing. I don't necessarily win incredible amounts, but there hasn't been an occasion in which, nowadays I do not play This Is Different as well here in the UK, unless I literally just see numbers, which at times it happens. Usually on last time that it happened, I literally had a page in front of me with numbers that were supposed to be amounts of shirts for a shop, I guess, I don't know. Even then, we didn't quite use the Smorfia, but we used the factorial and maths basically. And even then, I think I won 30 quid, which here, because you just have one extraction, It was still because I got like 3 or 4 numbers out of 6, so it was a lot. Just here the lotto pays much, much less than in Italy. But yeah, it's a peculiar thing, and it works. 6. Amulets and Talismans. Grace in her book has instructions on how to make a few of them, and again, I recommend you to get the book to see exactly what they are about. But the thing that really caught my eye is this bit. I have had remarkable success with amulets of different cultures, such as an Egyptian cartouche. The reason is that they were amuletic symbols intended for a specific purpose. By the way, Egyptian cartouches are ancient, and even one purchased at a flea market can be outrageously powerful. I've mentioned it here and there. I am half Arab. My father is Egyptian. Unfortunately, I haven't had a lot of connections with that side of my heritage or that side of the culture. But I naturally have a bit of an attraction for it, I guess especially getting older and so getting more into the idea of where do I come from and where am I going. So hearing this thing about Egyptian cartouches, which I didn't know what they were, but then I looked them up, and now I made it my life mission to find some, because I have this feeling that I have this humongous populace of ancestors, of which I don't know 50% of, which is massive. The people that in the thousands of years that they existed to then get down to me are beyond counting. And I only know a few of them, and I only know them from my mother's side, so my white side, my Italian side. And I can't imagine how many of my ancestors, you know, I'm not the only one from my father's side. My father had brothers and sisters. I have so many cousins I don't know about. And on the other side, from my family, I'm the last one of this branch because my mother was an only child. My grandparents had siblings, but yes, I am the last one with sort of the genes of my grandparents, so to speak, but then it branched out. And probably there's so much more instead from my father's side, which then makes me curious about whoever came before me. And I'm not essential to them because, again, the side of my father's family is so replenished with fresh blood. But I'm part of it. I'm this grain of sand, which maybe it's not that relevant, but still exists because they did. And so I would very, very, very much like to dig more of that up. I just don't know where to start. But just hearing about the powerful Egyptian cartouches, I just want to try and find one then, and then try to maybe ask my ancestors that I don't know to charge it for me, inhabit it for me, and even if I don't know them, I'd like to carry them with me somehow. We went a bit Egyptian there, rather than Italian, but hey. We're gonna go into cards, not necessarily tarot, but playing cards. And here's what Grace tells us. In my humble opinion, Italian playing cards are the best for detailed readings that seamlessly blend day-to-day mundanities and the arcane. In these cards, you can read whether the business deal you are entering is in your best interest and whether your mother-in-law has placed a curse on you. I had a note on the book that said Sibille. Now, I don't know if you've seen my video. It was one of the videos of the 12 Days of Yule. On the divination for the next year, instead of doing a tarot reading, I did a Sibille reading. Now, the Sibille are the second most sold kind of deck in Italy, just after the Tarot of Marseille. And it's a very specific thing. They're also called gypsy divination cards. They are so intrinsic to Italian culture that some people feel like it should be a closed practice. For my knowledge of it, I always feel like gates open for anything that has to do with me. But at the same time, I understand that there's a lot of specific things that you need to understand about Italian culture in Italy for some cards to make sense. And one of the examples that I gave in the reading for the year ahead that I did was the card of Superbia, haughtiness, which as a thing, as a feeling, is a negative thing, who's being arrogant, basically. In Italian culture, it's the best card of the entire deck. I think it's a Three of Clubs, the equivalent of the Three of Clubs, because that's the point. The Sibille are actually the 52 cards of the plain decks, the simple, what are they called? French cards? With clubs, hearts, diamonds, and spades. And the ones that I have are painted and decorated with watercolors because it's literally the deck that I used to see around, and I realized that it made sense because it was made in the 80s, so it makes sense that around the 90s I was seeing that around with cartomancers. But yes, they are not only the cards, but they're also related to the number and the suits of the playing cards. So with most of the meanings that Grace reports in the book, that's also the thing. Along with the Smorfia, you have all the meanings of every card in the playing deck when you want to do divination with playing cards or the Sibille. It's so unique. Like, I guess back in the day as a child, to a degree, I like them better than tarot because these decks specifically, which is also the one that then I found on eBay and I got, had so much color, nice, pastel-y, it was all watercolory, I loved it. And they are also called chatty cards, carte chiacchierine, because indeed what they do is they talk about very present, very mundane kind of things. They are not as closely related to tarot as you would think. They are not so much overlapping. And again, they are so intrinsic to the kind of things that you would want to know in your day-to-day life within Italian culture. So if for any reason, by any mean, you have an interest in Italian culture or you have Italian heritage, that is something that I would look into, because along with hopefully, I don't know, watching videos of people that talk about it in Italian, there's a couple of books in English on the Sibille. I'll link them down in the description below. But again, nothing gives you an idea of the good and bad, realistically, of Italian culture as much as the meanings of the Sibille and playing cards, basically, can deliver, because there are some things that from outside of Italy you will completely think, oh no, that's absolutely a negative thing. Not in Italy. If you can afford, going back to the Superbia card, if you can afford to be arrogant, to be haughty, is because you have the protection of God and you can do whatever you want, basically. And that's why haughtiness is a good card, but you wouldn't quite catch on that without understanding the context of the Italian culture related to it. They are so scaringly accurate. I use them once a year because I don't know how much I want to know. To the point that, here's a fun fact. This year, I not only did my own reading, but I did a reading for a friend. With my coven, we did divination reading for the year to come for each other. And so we all used our own methods. I used the Sibille for a friend of mine, and I pulled 12 cards, which technically it's one for each month, but realistically how the Sibille and therefore the playing cards work is relating to each other. So it doesn't necessarily tell you a story for each month to come. It tells you the events that are going to happen. I just picked 12 cards because at least that way it's related to the year, but it's not one per month. And the first 3 cards that I picked for this friend of mine, I don't remember exactly what they were, unfortunately. I didn't take a picture, but she remembered, oh, you did tell me that there was going to be a romance, a kind of thing coming with the new year, which is not something she foresaw or looked into. Like, she had been single for a long time and she was okay with it. And I kid you not, they came to visit me a few days ago, so January wasn't at the end yet, and she told me, there's this very weird thing that has happened. I met this guy and it's weird, but it's nice, but it's interesting, but it's fun. Really didn't see it coming, not with a person like that either. And she remembers, like, didn't the Sibille say so? That at the beginning of the year there would have been this weird, swept off your feet but quick romance. Indeed. And after a few days she also told me that they stopped seeing each other. The Sibille are scary, be careful about them. They also need to be very, very, very well respected. Do not kid around with them. 8. The Evil Eye, the Malocchio. How do we identify it? How do we dispel it? How do we ward from it? Again, Grace covers this in such beautiful detail that her book is gonna cover it all. Here's a snippet from it. Reading water and oil are also used to diagnose Malocchio. Oil added to a white shallow bowl, 2/3 filled with water, is the method most commonly used in conjunction with the assessment of other symptoms to read if someone is afflicted with Malocchio. You will need a bottle of oil, a teaspoon, salt, scissors, and at that point you observe the oil. If the oil drops migrate towards each other and merge, Malocchio is present. If oil drops burst and spread out over the surface of the water, appearing to disappear, Malocchio is also present. If the oil drops do not change at all, Malocchio is not present. Grace has also details on how to make talismans that basically protect you from the Malocchio and don't let it come to you at all. And also she highlights how some people can be more susceptible than others to catch the evil eye. So if somebody thinks bad of you or jealously of you, there is a certain mindset that you might have which will make those bad feelings easier for them to attach themselves to you. So again, pick up her book. She covers it A to Z and some extras as well. I will say this about Malocchio. One of the best things that has happened to me to not experience it personally, touch on wood, is that I try to be very invisible. You wouldn't say that by seeing me on YouTube, but let's just say I take a lot of precautions. And no one from my Italian life knows anything about me anymore to even be able to think about me, let alone think badly or think jealously of me. The one time that I have seen some of that vaguely present, I luckily managed to switch things around because I preemptively did a spell. What's the story there, Isha? How do I give you this without too many personal information? Okay. Anyway, I was in Italy, and this judge, I could tell, had a weird resentment for the fact that I was living somewhere that evidently he thought was better, but because he was in a position to pass a judgment to my effect, that was really tempting, I imagine, for him. This is someone that escaped to a better place. But I am a judge, I have power over them. Can I overpower them? Oh yes, I will. The shocking thing for me happened during the hearing. And the judge stopped whatever they were saying, no matter how low I was speaking, and shushed me. Shh! To this day, I am baffled that an adult person could do that in a legal setting to another adult person. And indeed, despite how obvious the result of this should have been, actually was not in the end in what was considered my favor. However, it genuinely freed me of the hold that my mother had on me, because what basically that ruling decided was that I was no longer in any way responsible for her from that moment on. I have stuff to carry on my shoulder for what she did before, but from that moment on, which is bizarre because everybody was like, oh, but the opposite should happen and you would have more freedom in solving problems. But to me, rather than that, was also the idea of I've been subjugated for my entire life to her. Even Italian law thinks that as a daughter, I owe her beyond what is fair, beyond what is right, just because she birthed me. So that ruling actually, I guess he kind of hated me and he kind of was jealous. And he did that ruling to throw a wrench in my plans, he probably thought. But I think because of the spell that I did, asking for Saturn's help to be free, that is exactly what happened. And I guess that's how I managed to swish around that kind of Malocchio that time. Like, I'm sure that he thought that he was offending and doing the worst for me that way. He actually helped me be free. And even just the understanding of that maybe is what the spell did. But that's why, if I have the chance, I just try to be invisible to Italians. Because that way, don't think about me, you can't think anything negative either. 9. La Bella Mbriana and house spirits. The beautiful Mbriana, for the people of Naples, is the name of the angel of the hearth and the bearer of fortunate events. She's a mysterious creature, a kind of benevolent presence that brings wellness and health. La Bella Mbriana dwells permanently in a house placed under her protection. I think there are syncretizations with Vesta in this. I have a specific video about how I started to work with Vesta. And you know what they say about how do you know if a deity wants to work with you? And because I'm skeptical and I unfortunately doubt myself a lot and my intuition as well, it took me some time to realize, well, actually there must have been a call, because I don't just think about old Roman gods. And I am not supposed to know what they did beyond, the popular ones that are also the Olympian ones. Hestia or Vesta is not necessarily one of those, and yet the moment that was relevant, it immediately came to me. The description of the Bella Mbriana that Grace brings to me is extremely close and extremely similar to my experience of Vesta. So I do wonder if La Bella Mbriana was a syncretization of Vesta in general or of house spirits in general, so the Lares of antique Roman time. Because she knows what she's doing about not only keeping a house safe, but making it a home. And I'll stop there because this video is already long. If you want to hear about my adoration for Vesta and the house and the hearth, I'll send you to the specific video that I've done about her. It's worth watching, and maybe I'm biased, but I love her so much, and I love my house so much, and I tell her every day. Freezing spells. Her hand landed on the door handle. My great-aunt slammed her hand on the table and shouted, "No, not that one. I keep my enemies in there. The other icebox." My dad quickly looked at his aunt and, in our dialect, asked, "Who exactly do you keep in there?" Zia Paolina winked at me and replied to her nephew, "Don't worry, they all deserved it." Freezing spells, I said. That is something that you might know of even if you're not related or involved with Italian folk magic and witchcraft. And keeping things in the icebox, in the freezer, it's something that I think I intuitively started to do last year, at the very beginning of my practice. No one taught me, actually, from my Italian heritage. But I think I mixed up things between things that I read on traditional South American folk magic and, all those things that you hear about. I think they are of hoodoo or Santeria derivation. And so, like when you write a petition and it's something that you want to take away from you, you write and then you write your name on top of it. And every time you turn the paper around and you turn it anti-clockwise if you want it away from you. So, related to the bureaucratic stuff that I was talking about, whenever I get a bad piece of paper related to that, I've taken the habit of making a copy for my legal team, and then I freeze it, I lock it. And I do that by doing certain things with certain oils on the paper itself, and then I fold it away from me, counterclockwise, away from me, counterclockwise, until I can, and it's a very, very small thing. At that point, I make knots with a twine to hold it there, and I put it in the most remote space of my freezer. And going back to what I mentioned, it has helped for people not to think about me, which is good. It's not a solution, it's a temporary pin, but it's a good kind of thing. So I see what Zia Paolina was doing there. This is a spell that not only I found in an Italian book in Italian as well about witchcraft, but I remember witnessing. If you have a light stomach, skip to the end of this part. I will put the times in the chapters, just skip to the next one, it's fine. Because content awareness, content warning, we're going to talk about blood and edibles. You've made your choice if you're still here. To make someone fall madly and obsessively in love with you. Bake a cake after adding some drops of blood from your ring finger to the batter. Once the cake is cooled, feed it to the man or woman you want to fall in love with you. Add a few drops of menstrual blood, or if you are a man, semen, to coffee and offer it unknowingly to the man, woman you want to fall in love with you. This also is pretty much like that in this book, which is in Italian and it's called Il libro dei rimedi magici, riti, scongiuri, formule by Guido Guerrera. And it's basically gathering a lot of tradition and superstition from all around Italy. And literally there's a spell to be violently loved. This is actually just referred to women. And it has the same incantation and the same description you need to use and make them eat your menstrual blood. My mother was a horrible person, and I've seen her do that. Thank goodness, I don't think it ever worked. But don't do that. Don't consent, bodily fluids, no, please, no. Let this be a warning, not an invitation to do something like this. Even Grace mentions, no, no, no. Saints. Let's go into the cult of saints. Grace has a beautiful, long and explicative part about saint patrons of a place, patrons of a family, patrons of a person, your own saint if you are baptized with the name of a saint, which I actually discovered I am not. That's the weirdest thing. My Christian name is not Isha, as you can imagine, but it's not part of the names of the saint. Because again, my father was Arabic, so my first name is Arabic. So as you can guess, there wasn't a saint with that name. I find it mind-boggling that my mother found a priest that would baptize me with a name that isn't of a saint in any way, but evidently they did. My wife Raven mentioned, oh, sometimes, are you sure you haven't been baptized with a Christian name and then with your name? No, I'm sure, I remember the story. I just don't understand how they managed to find a priest desperate enough to baptize me with an Arabic name, but they did. So I don't have an onomastico, I don't have a date that I celebrate because it's the day of the saint I'm named after. So I think I go by the saints that are celebrated on my birthday, which is interesting because one of them lived a very, very, very long life, like over 100 years back in the olden days. So I like that. I need to ask him for intercession to get me as far in life as possible, physically, ever. I'm a bit attached to life, I don't know if you can tell. Withholding of the love and offerings is called saint punishing. It was very common for my grandmother's generation and those before her generation to threaten and punish saints that were not pulling their weight, so to speak. Threatening consisted of just that, threats. They would utter threats at the saint in the same breath they petitioned them. They began with petitioning the saint for a favor and ended the prayer or ritual by threatening, "Make it happen, or else you're dead to me." If threats didn't work, they punished their saints. Punishing ranged from mild, such as not placing fresh flowers in front of their portraits or statues, to moderate, such as taking the statue or portrait and wrapping it in a black cloth and showing it in a drawer. you might know of this, even if you're not Catholic. Saint Expedite, or Expedite, however you pronounce it, is actually a non-canonical saint. His story is amazing to me. There is a double legend about him. One is that he was a martyr because he was a Roman soldier in Anatolia, and he wanted to convert to Christianity, and there was a crow that probably was the devil that wanted to tempt him and tell him, oh, convert tomorrow, cra, which is also the sound that the crow makes in Latin, but also cra means tomorrow. And Saint Expedite allegedly then said, no, today, hodie, and smashes the crow, and that's why Saint Expedite supposedly is the saint of very quick things done a lot. His head was cut off, and that's the reason why when you petition to Saint Expedite you need to be very precise, because he has lost his head, so you need to guard the possible consequences that might happen for him to grant your wish. So always make sure that you make a point of with no harm to me or the people that I love, da 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 da. One of the practical stories about how the cult of Saint Expedite might have started was that there was a shipment of statues that was getting to New Orleans in the South in the United States. And statues were getting to this church, and one of them didn't have a name written on it, but it had Expedite written on it, which likely is something that you write on packages, on parcels, to say it needs to be there quickly. It's an Expedite pack. But he was taken as Saint Expedite, that Expedite was the name, and he started to be worshipped in this church. And the Vatican tried to make a point of, no, this is not a saint, you don't get to do this. And the church had to make a point of, the people here like this saint, he does stuff for them, so we're not gonna take it down. If we take it down, is at your own risk of losing faithful people here. And so you decide which one, but that's the thing. Why am I bringing in Saint Expedite? Because one of the things that you might read in the processes of working with Saint Expedite is you start by giving half of the offerings at the beginning of your work with him, of your novena, and then you promise what else will come when your wish is granted. Some people, if they have a statue or a card of Saint Expedite, also decide to start off with the statue or the image upside down. That is part of the punishing of the saints, basically. The saint is upside down and therefore uncomfortable until they grant what you want. And a couple of things that I've read about that is, you can do that, but it's a bit bossy. But the nonnas in Italy would have totally done that. So, just so you know. It's the same, I think, with planting is it Saint Anthony? It's probably another saint. But you plant it upside down in the ground of a house that you want to sell until it's sold, and then you take it out. There's also, I don't think it's done to Saint Anthony, I'm just thinking of Saint Anthony today. Hey. There is a saint that I remember the story. I actually asked Grace, and Grace couldn't remember either or hadn't heard it that way. Again, regions in Italy, hey? And nonnas petitioned this saint for something, not only asking and promising, but also making a knot in a napkin. Basically saying, this napkin is your balls right now. So until you give me what I've asked, they're gonna stay in a knot. And they would put it under the bed, and apparently, sure enough, the saint would deliver quickly. Ancestors. I leave this for last because, I don't know, actually if you'd like an entire video on my ancestor works, do let me know. Here I mention what Grace brings, which is not necessarily all that I hear about in general in witchcraft about ancestors' work, but possibly not accidentally, is exactly the same approach that I have to ancestors' work. So again, maybe there is some genetic memory there. When I speak of honoring and working with my ancestors, I mean my most immediate relatives who are deceased. My parents, aunts, uncles, grandparents, great-grandparents, great-great-grandparents. It is the constant retelling of their stories that keeps the line open, so to speak. Every time I retell their stories, I gain a deeper understanding of who I am. I sort of had an ancestor's altar, I just didn't call it like that, before I started to practice. The pictures of my grandparents were always out in a way or another. For my own wedding, I wore two of their items that I still have. Accidentally, they're both made of silver, which I have a feeling is quite protective. And they just come with me all the time. And if you've seen my sewing video, you've seen like the very first meditation that I've done. I think that's actually where Grace left her first comment, or one of her first comment to my videos, that like brought such joy to my heart to see that I was recognized by one of my people, which is like, it meant a lot. That meditation likely allowed me to commune with my deceased grandfather. And it's probably because they raised me, so in a way they are my parents more than my grandparents. And unfortunately they have been gone for such a long time. They weren't with me long enough, and they did the best that they could to safeguard and protect me and set down the foundations for a good life for me. But unfortunately they passed away when I wasn't of age yet, legally, and so I guess they are the reason why, difficult as it has been to still deal with Italy. I haven't lived in Italy for more than half my life now, and I genuinely would just like to have it gone. And the reason why there are some things that I still want to try and fix is just because of them, is just to honor the work that they have done. There are things that are related to them. I would have stories to tell you. Like last year I had a tarot reading that turned out to be a psychic reading, and all of a sudden this person read me for filth basically with things that my grandmother would have known, but not them. Sometimes they work extremely quick when I ask them for help regarding the stuff in Italy. There have been times that I haven't heard from my lawyer in some time, and I light them a candle, and even if I haven't heard from my lawyers in weeks, all of a sudden within a couple of hours they call me. That's the kind of thing. The few times that I've made food that I remember them eating, I not quite did a dumb supper, but I took just a mouthful, not much, but I put it in front of their picture, and I put the picture on the table so that they would be on the table with me and my wife. I keep thinking, when I met my wife, I kept telling her, I have a thing, I think that aesthetically, purely shallow in a way, my grandmother would have loved you. It's just, it's weird because in a way I don't have the feeling that they have ever left. Although there are things that I don't quite remember, like I'm not quite sure that in my head I actually remember their voices anymore. But there were things, we had this very peculiar connection. There's a picture on my altar here that was actually taken the night before my grandmother was taken to the hospital the last time, and then she passed away 3 days after that. That night, there was no suspicion, or at least it wasn't given to me as a child, that this was anything bad for my grandmother. And it was planned for her to go to the hospital, like it wasn't because she was unwell. Enough, at least. Like other than being an 83-year-old woman. And that night I was next to her, and I had this intuition, I guess. I wasn't sad or anything. I genuinely did not foresee that she was gonna pass. But not only I asked for that picture to be taken, but I also cut a piece of her hair that I kept with me in a little box for a very long time, and then until I left home for university, and then my mother kept that, and then I think it's lost now. But I guess that's one of the things that gives the idea of the kind of connection that I have to them. And it's not something conscious or that I understand or that I had a feeling that it was intuition or whatever, but clearly there's this connection that has never stopped, to the point that I don't dream of them often, but when I do, I never have the understanding of, but you're gone. And therefore I don't necessarily have the, oh my goodness, like the surprise. It's like I'm glad to see them, because, oh, I haven't seen you in a while, but it's not like you were ever gone. I think the longer time goes on, the more interested I am in this kind of past. I have this incredible ambition of being able to trace back my matrilineal line. And unfortunately, because of patriarchy, because children get the surname of their father, and girls get their name from their father's mother, and so on, it's a hard thing to do bureaucratically, to dig back. It is the favorite part of my practice, to be able to think that in a way I can connect to them, I can light them candles, I can try and ask them for advice. There's a point that Grace brings in the book, talking about sometimes you find things that are related to your ancestor, and it's their way to say hello. The other day when I found the key, I had just been to the doctor's, and I was just walking on my own in a street that has a lot of charity shops, thrift stores. And Grace literally brings that point about thrift stores. And like, maybe you find a thing that you hadn't seen of them in a while, but it's the same kind of thing, or someone gives to you, or you find it in a thrift store. For some time now, I've been thinking of my grandfather's hats. My grandfather used to wear Borsalino hats. And I remember them. I remember him still buying them when I was around. And unfortunately, when I had the chance to go to my childhood home, it was brief. I found pictures. I was happy to have found the pictures, but that was it. And I don't have one of his hats, and I wish I did. They were beautiful fedoras, and there were also more paperboy kind of hats, which I've tried to find for a while, but I have a very big head. If hats are one size, they're not going to fit me, especially if they are made for girls, women. I went to this thrift store, and usually I just look at kitchen stuff. I love like old ceramic stuff. And accidentally I see the part of the wall that has sort of men's stuff. And there are a lot of these, which is exactly the kind of hat that my grandfather would have worn. I have pictures of him in these. I remember him in these. But usually they wouldn't fit me, but this was in the men's section, so it would. I saw it and I realized, and in the moment I thought, oh, this is meant to. And I think that evening I read that part of Grace's book that talks about, if you find these things, it's them saying hello. And that's what I love about my practice. Oh, that was a lot of stuff, wasn't it? I really hope that I can edit this quickly and it can be out on Monday and you can enjoy it. And let me know, do you have experience of all these traditions and superstitions from Italy? Have you heard about them as well? Have you heard them from your previous generations if you're not based in Italy anymore? Let me know. I'd love to know more about your own experience. I cannot recommend Grace's book enough. graces is one of the few good Italians, a Sa Benedica Grace, because I feel so lucky to have had most of the stuff that I have from Italy now just hurts. But I still have this connection with my heritage because I loved my grandparents so much, I still do. So having found someone that talks about the things that I experienced with them without having to be dragged down by my bad experiences has been something invaluable. I count myself so lucky not only to have found Grace's book, but to have had a chance to speak to her and for her to be so graceful indeed and gracious to speak to me and share with me her experiences. It makes me feel close to that side of my heritage without all the bad stuff connected. So thank you, Grace, for all you do. I'll link her book down in the description below. I'll link her channel, of course. It's so beautiful. When she does videos, she's just talking to you like you're a friend sitting on her kitchen table. Which is a very Italian thing to do. And I just love to have her in the background, and it's like having this friend in my house talking with me. So I cannot recommend that enough. Go have a chat with Grace, sit down and listen to all her wisdom. And until next time, I hope that we can hex the patriarchy together, because boy, if there's need for it.